Save that for later.
Who are we still waiting for, Rebecca?
Catherine and
Catherine and Kim.
Okay, and we know Sarah won't be here.
Sarah won't be here. I haven't heard anything either way from Catherine or Kim, but
I'm fine with getting started if everyone else is, and then hopefully they'll hop on.
Can I just ask a question, Pam, before we start? Is there significance to every time we have a long-range planning meeting that you're surrounded by wine?
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about.
Are you trying to taunt us?
As long as I don't start drinking it, right? While we're meeting, it's all good. It comes later. Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to taunt you. Next time I'll just have wine bottles behind me instead of like in my wine fridges.
Awesome.
No. We're actually doing a Zoom tasting later on today. It should be really fun. So.
Yeah, and the nice thing about doing a Zoom tasting is you don't have to worry about driving.
Exactly.
So you can taste all you want.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this, we're in a couple wine clubs in California. And so this was where you taste like 3 wines with some cheese that they pair with it and some chocolate. And I think it's meant for more people than just 2. So, so we'll see.
So, do you have ambitions to start a winery when you retire early or from library work?
My husband had that thought. He has that thought every time we go out there and stuff, but I'm like, yeah, we'll just lose our pants just doing regular things, not trying to open up a winery. My ultimate job would be to be the people that pour the wine for people to taste. So just chit chat all day and taste wine. So it sounds good.
Oh, yay.
Sounds like a good plan.
All right, so sorry about my personal stuff, but so it looks like Kim did join us. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and call the meeting to order of the Long Range Planning Committee on Friday, December 11th at looks like 10:02 a.m. Can we do roll call, please?
Brown, Danzig Lyons,
Here?
Leffler,
Here.
Lemmer, Lemke,
here.
Martins. Kim, are you muted?
Here.
Thank you. McNulty,
Find my unmute
Here.
button.
Shepherd,
Here.
and Tucci.
Here.
Also present, Rebecca Malinowski, Beth Stonebrenner, Stacy yes.
Catherine's on her way in.
Oh, okay.
There she is, coming in. Okay.
Hi, Catherine. We just did roll call, so you haven't missed anything. So are there any additions to the agenda? No? Okay, public comment? Don't think there's any public here. So the first order of business is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, the November 2nd meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move. I'll second.
Okay.
Okay, so I have McNulty and Lemke.
Yes.
Thank you. Now do roll.
Yep.
Danzig Lyons,
Yes.
Leffler,
Yes.
Lemmer, Catherine.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Lemke,
Yes.
Martins,
I will abstain since I was not there.
McNulty,
Yes.
Shepherd,
I will also abstain.
and Tucci.
Yes.
So that brings us to the meat of the meat of the discussion today, so the strategic planning process. Everyone should have received the draft documents from Rebecca. So the first thing we need to do is to review the draft strategic plan. And throughout the strategic plan, Rebecca did have some questions that she raised for us to address, as well as some discussion questions. So I don't know, Rebecca, if you had a thought about how you wanted to move through that, or if we just kind of start from the beginning and move down, or go through the document that way.
Let's start with, I should have put these questions in order. Are we all comfortable with a 3-year plan with a target to review goals annually? I know we talked about COVID and, you know, wanting to be flexible, but I also like want to put a time period on this. Any questions or
Yeah, I
concerns?
think that sounds like a good idea. Oh, am I muted? No.
No, you're.
Yeah,
I
I would agree. I
agree.
think it sounds like a good plan, and you know, I like the way that it was laid out, and that as a way of going forward.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree as well. And I know that Sarah, when she sent her email, she thought that that was a good idea as well. So it sounds, is anyone opposed to that or thinks that the timing or the time frame, the timeline should be different?
No. You know, we actually just discussed the same thing at our board meeting last night, about what dates we should actually use for ours because of COVID. So I agree with this. The dates sound good.
Okay.
I think it's a good idea to have that kind of a little bit, you know, that middle to long range vision, if you will, or plan. And then, you know, we can look at it every year. And if something drastic happens, like the pandemic or whatever, that gives us the opportunity to make those changes to give us a little bit more flexibility. Reviewing it annually.
Perfect.
This is Kim. I have a question then. I don't disagree that 3 years is good with an annual review. Overall, what I was wondering with this draft plan, are these, very few of these are written in measurable terms.
Yeah. And I did that on purpose, knowing that's not a best practice, really to provide the additional flexibility that we would need, or that we might need, we just don't know. I mean, we could certainly add dates to things like ensure all CCS staff are cross-trained, you know, by X date. But then other things like incorporate universal design practices into CCS services and products, like that's something we need to do some research on to make sure that we like know the right principles, which is relatively time bound, but then it's about operationalizing that and making sure we're doing that all the time. So yes, I agree that there are these are certainly more loose than our previous strategic plan objectives were. And I'm happy to further discuss that or make changes.
So I'm just gonna I like this plan and the flexibility of that, and I think where the measurable, you know, like when we start talking about SMART goals, I think that starts coming in on the annual basis. When you start reviewing the goals on an annual basis, I think you can get very, you know, it's very that's the time to really start to get into that measurable and all of those things, because you just have a better frame of reference at that point to be able to make those decisions. It's hard 3 years out to be able to say, well, what is coming 3 years down the road? I think that this plan gives you that ability, and then give you the ability to, on that annual basis, to review it and put those type of direct measurable goals attached to it.
And I agree with that, Brian. So if this is our first framework, then I think our next step should be, well, what are our 1 year goals? Because it's not only is it good for CCS, it's also good protection, if you will, for Rebecca, in terms of, you know, it's clear what the expectations were for the year.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but
I'm sorry,
going
I
for-
agree with that as well. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. I agree with that.
Mhm, okay.
And going back to my our long range or strategic plan, we have an activity sheet, and we'll have like a monthly report that we'll be doing. But the activity sheet is where we have some flexibility in putting dates, and we don't have to do them all at once. So that's something maybe we would look at along with that annual review, saying, you know, this is what we're going to do for the activities for this year. or even 6
Yeah.
months. I mean, sometimes you don't know until 6 months later what the possibilities are for getting something completed.
Mm-hmm.
And Diane, can I ask you, you worked with Amanda Standifer, right?
Yes.
On that?
Yeah.
Okay, because we did as well. So that's very similar to how we have our plan structured and kind of the framework for our plan. So
And they're nice worksheets that she gives you and that to work with. So I think it'll be very workable for us. That's what we reviewed with our board last night. We haven't assigned dates yet. That's our next step after the first of the year, because we want to implement July 1st as well. So anyway.
And we're updating our strategic plan in Evanston too, and similar to what you two are describing, we'll have the strategic plan, but then we're going to have a plan and implementation plan with much more specificity. So those parallel documents just make more sense, I think.
Kim, does doing something like that address some of your concerns with that? I think I agree with you guys. I think that sounds like a great idea, but I want to make sure that Kim's concerns are.
Absolutely.
Okay.
No, that sounds perfect.
And Rebecca, I mean, as far as you and your staff.
That's perfect. I love it.
Okay. So did you, go ahead.
I'm just trying to pull out, I'm sorry I didn't put these in a better order, the sort of big picture questions, and then we can go through. So I feel like that sort of just answered question number 5 on the discussion questions about, is this specific enough and how do we address that? So then number 4, if we want to quickly touch on the guiding principles, do we need anything else in here because it's new? I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory.
I really liked the guiding principles, and I agree. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I know that Sarah had raised a question about how she was interpreting professional development versus training.
Well, and that was one of the questions I asked the committee as well. So I think she was weighing in on that because that guiding principle has professional development in it. You know, how do we want to delineate that to make sure that CCS is meeting those expectations of the guiding principle while not duplicating services that exist outside of CCS? So we can talk about that if you'd like at this time, or we can wait until we're going through the individual initiatives.
Does anyone have thoughts on the guiding principles? You think they're good the way they're laid out? Want to add anything, take away anything, change anything?
So this is Kim again. I think that they do sound good with that professional in terms of the professional development or continuing ed. In the guiding principles, I think that it's worded well because it kind of gives all scopes, and in a sense, continuing ed borders between professional development and training. So I feel like they're well worded and they cover everything.
Yeah, Susan, I agree. I like the guiding principles. I really like that we're including the guiding principles. I think it's a real strong addition to the document. It's possible that when it goes to governing board, people will not entirely agree and we'll have some other things to say, but I think it's a good thing to bring to them.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on those? So it sounds like, Rebecca, that at least as far as this group is concerned, that we all like the guiding principles and don't see any need to change them at this point.
Yep, that sounds good. Do we want to then, I'm sorry, Catherine, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say you need an Oxford comma after training, but I was going to say it in chat. I couldn't find chat.
Do we want to then go through the strategic directions and then those will hit the other questions I had for the committee, Pam?
Sure, okay. Okay, so we're moving on to review of the strategic directions. The first one is to develop flexible, responsive services that will continue to improve the patron and staff experience. Rebecca has laid out a few things. She did say for the committee, how are we defining professional development versus training? And then she recommended that CCS focus on providing training related to the ILS. So I don't know. And then her second question was, should CCS teach core skills like cataloging basics and principles? And that their recommendation is not to do this.
So just to provide, like, because in our guiding principles, you know, we say professional development as well as training. I don't know that I'd necessarily write it in the plan, but I'd like to get the committee's general input on the difference between the types of topics that would be covered.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I don't think that it's CCS's place to provide like how to do a reference interview, which I think would be great professional development for a library, but not from CCS. So when we're thinking about, you know, professional development related to the ILS, I feel like it's a more narrow scope, but certainly something that we do, I think.
So related to that, Sarah's suggestion then as one of the points under this particular strategic direction, if I'm understanding her email correctly, is that she's suggesting including something like establish and annually evaluate a CCS professional development plan to ensure continued education, research, networking, and forecasting in their field. I don't know how I feel about it. It almost sounds like that's geared more towards CCS staff. And the way I was looking at the document was that it was more outward focused as opposed to, you know, a guideline for CCS staff so much. Does that make sense? I know I'm not.
Yeah.
It also strikes me that her comment relates to what we were talking about earlier, that's more of a specific annual, possibly activity. So if we change the wording in the strategic plan to incorporate Sarah's proposed language, then it starts changing the whole tone of what we're looking at right now, which is more general.
So Rebecca, did you have some thoughts, or your staff have some thoughts about how you want to incorporate that professional development piece here, or how you want to word it?
I mean, so I think we're already doing it. I don't know that it needs to be a specific goal at this time, because it's part of our, like, we already build a training plan quarterly, and that includes some basics as well as some sort of like stretch or professional development topics. Certainly things have been disrupted due to COVID, but I think it's kind of built in to regularly evaluate synchronous and asynchronous training offerings. I just wanted to make sure that my definition of professional development and the committee's was similar, so we weren't, so I'm not saying, oh yeah, we're already doing that, and you're all saying, but no, you're not. So that was really my question. And then the question from my staff is, you know, when we're talking about training, we occasionally get requests from library staff to like teach them how to assign call numbers, or, you know, things that, you know, are more like core skills or basics on how they should be, that they would have learned in school, or, you know, in some other training course, like an LTA thing. So I don't feel CCS should wade into that, because I think, one, we don't really have the staff to provide like a curriculum like that. And two, I think it's really easy to come up with like examples for catalogers, but then it's like, well, if we're serving them in this way, what are we doing for like reference staff and circulation? And then that's when we're getting into like customer service and reference interviews and all these things that just are not what we do. So for this, I just wanted to make sure that that omission, that we're not doing that, is on board with what the committee expects as well.
This is Catherine. So I see a radical difference between teaching people reference interviews and teaching cataloging, because cataloging goes directly to the quality of the database. And if there's a capacity for people to call and say, you know, what's the preferred call number in this, I think that's a very different kind of training, because that's preservation of the integrity of the database. You know, there's many times in this document where I get confused about, are you speaking to what CCS does, or what do you, like, is it professional development of the CCS staff or professional development of the library staff? And I'm just kind of willing to live with it, because I know there's going to be an annual report every year that documents what you did under each bullet point. But again, I would just express that I see that there's a big difference between cataloging questions, training, and reference, but I might be the only one.
No, I want to just jump in and just say, I want to echo what Catherine said, because I thought the exact same thing. I think that there is a big difference between cataloging, because it is data integrity of the shared ILS, and like that to me, like, there is a clear distinction in my mind of you know, data integrity in the ILS versus like doing reference interviews and that. And so I was curious, you know, when I read that part of the plan where you said you recommend against that, I was curious why that was, because I do see that as being very different when we look at like the data that's going into the ILS, and making sure that there is some type of, you know, anything we can do to create a degree of consistency or standard amongst libraries, I would think would be a benefit really for all of us. And so I didn't know if you could maybe speak to that a little bit, Rebecca.
Sure. So I am 100% not saying that we should not be providing standards and, you know, helping members interpret national practice and setting, you know, making sure our local practices match, you know, the needs of our users and our library staff. What I'm recommending against is like providing a course that's like Mark 101, or like how to, you know, like write a 245. Certainly as folks have questions about things, our staff are 100% always available to answer a question about, you know, what, and we do a lot of work with like, okay, so what goes in like the prefix versus the classification number versus the suffix of a call number. But when it comes to like, oh, I didn't take a cataloging class in library school, but now, you know, the CERC department and the cataloging department merged, so now I need to learn how to be a cataloger. That is what I'm saying CCS should not get into. Rails has started a cataloging. They've recently hired Nancy George, who's a cataloger, and she is providing multi-part training sessions that are like cataloging basics and like how to use RDA and do that work. So I would refer anyone who had questions about like, how do I get started, to something like that, and that CCS would focus on, you know, the work of scrap and database management to identify and resolve issues, as opposed to like laying the foundations to teach someone how to catalog. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think that I was thinking of it in terms of, you are responsible for helping set standards and maintain the standards so that we have excellent data in our database, but not for sort of elementary kinds of teaching. You know, if some of that ends up happening in some of the technical groups, if people want to, for themselves, create presentations to kind of, you know, if you find that some people really don't seem to be able to search accurately and well, but there are some really easy ways that you can recommend, you know, how you're doing it, then there wouldn't be anything wrong with PASS doing that, but it wouldn't be something that would fall on your staff. It would be something more that would be the group itself helping each other. But yeah, in terms of professional development, there are a lot of other sources for professional development. And that I don't see as the role of CCS. So I agree with you.
I do as well. I read this more the way that you presented it, Rebecca, that, you know, it's absolutely CCS's role to set standards and those kinds of things. But in terms of the core skills, like you say, is not really, I don't think, the responsibility of CCS. And if Rails is starting to do some of that work, why reinvent the wheel? Why duplicate that effort if we don't have to? Or at least, as, you know, as long as we know that there's resources out there for libraries that may need that. But yeah, I think that kind of general, this is how you know, catalog a book is not necessarily CCS's responsibility.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. I appreciate the explanation and kind of explaining the difference there. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Catherine, does that address some of your concern as well? Or did you have additional comments?
No, I think that's fine. I think that there's opportunities in the CCS budget for them to, because I think, having a class taught by Rails would be very different than a class taught by CCS. So I would hope that over the course of the coming years, CCS would build into their training budget some classes that deal with how we as a organization catalog, because it is different. It's not, doesn't match everybody else's. Each consortium is different, but I mean, I think I've been in that database, so we either have to pay to clean up the database or we have to start paying to train people. So I think better to train people, but that's just my thoughts.
So maybe an objective, you know, once we start looking at them annually is, it's not necessarily the core, like how do you catalog a book kind of thing, but the training could be, you know, making sure that the standards of CCS are clearly spelled out for people.
Right. I mean, I just think that would be my suggestion, because every time you add a library, it's going
Right.
just the quality of the database start, you know, everything doesn't match on the merge.
I have a question. Since I have essentially, except for a 1-year break, been at a CCS library since 1982. I've seen how we went from a 30-field format to MARC records and all that, and done a lot of database cleanup myself when I was a cataloger. But we used to have guidelines for membership and what was expected of membership. And maybe we need to dig those out and present those, and that needs to be maybe concentrated on a little bit more, because like I have an LTA doing cataloging, and she did a lot of extra cataloging course work so that she could really know the job. And she finds that some of the libraries nowadays are hiring people that really don't have the cataloging skills and knowledge. And maybe that's something we all need to concentrate on a little bit more to help keep that database clean. And maybe that's just something that we work towards. I don't know that that's related so much to the strategic plan, but maybe it's something that we can fold in somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm hearing multiple committee members say that, you know, a focus on standards and making sure that library staff understand our existing standards and, you know, are able to meet them is a good place to focus our efforts. So, you know, identifying, and there's, some of this is already happening, but it's in a, I think, a more sporadic way. It's like, oh, we've identified an issue, we'll talk about it at the next catalogers meeting. But maybe building more of that into our onboarding for cataloging staff, more of a focus on, like, we provide them with the local practices. We're like, here, go read these local practices, but maybe building more activities and you know, making sure they have the experience and knowledge to interpret what we're sharing is a good place to focus.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like, I don't want to speak for anyone, but it does sound like that would address some of the concerns that have been raised around this point.
And you should be able to see my screen. I'm just adding notes to this document informally to be a reminder for me about what we need to talk about with the staff when we're planning our goals.
Does anyone else have any additional comments related to either this specific strategic direction or specifically about professional development or anything that we've just discussed or agreed upon? Or do we feel like we're comfortable and ready to move on? Okay, we'll just move on. Rebecca, did you have anything else that you wanted to say related to this specific point? Okay.
No, thank you.
So the next one, the next strategic direction is strategically build membership to further promote resource sharing in Illinois. And Rebecca had made a comment about for the committee, develop a strategy for membership growth that centers diversity, equity, and inclusion. I had some questions related to this, but do you want to talk about what information you were trying to get from us, Rebecca?
So we talked about you know, DEI and how we want to build that into the plan or to our recommendations for governing board. I don't know what this looks like, and Sarah had a suggestion to rewrite that one to say prioritize membership growth that reflects our commitment to equity, diversion, and inclusion, which I think does sound nicer. But so my question is, this kind of came up at the last meeting. I think Catherine brought up, like, do we want our membership to be focused on, you know, bringing in diversity of libraries, and how would we accomplish that, or not? Is that not something that we're interested in? So that is what, for the committee, like, do we want to put this in here in some way? And I think Sarah has some great suggestions on wording for other elements of this, this component as well.
Hi, it's Karen here in Glacier National Park. I like the way that Sarah has suggested some adjustments to the wording. I've talked about this before. We've talked about this before. I think recognizing that diversity is important, not just for diversity's sake, but it enriches our work, it enriches our thinking and our collections, is something that we would be remiss if we didn't include it in here. Not diversity for diversity's sake, but recognizing that as we expand, that that's something that is an added value.
I agree with that. I guess my only question / concern, I don't even know that I would rise this to that level, is, you know, how do we do that? How do we measure that? What does that look like? You know, as Rebecca was saying, I mean, does that mean we actively pursue libraries or try to get libraries to join that, serve a more diverse community? I guess I'm just saying, you know, what does it look like to do that? I mean, if we're going to include it, how are we trying to reach that strategic goal, or that, you know, move in that direction, I guess. I mean, I think it's a great sentiment, and we're all, you know, really cognizant and thinking about that right now, but again, what does that look like?
Well, and some of it has to do with programs and collections, and what we're choosing to purchase and what we're choosing to share and circulate. I know we're certainly doing a lot of work on finding sources of authors and materials with stories and books that are created in people's own voices, as opposed to written about them, written by them. And so that's part of diversity, thinking about who you're serving and how well you're serving them. And I can't believe that there aren't many of our libraries that don't have diverse local populations. I know some do not, but Evanston can't be the only one with a diverse residential population.
One thing we've done for, I think maybe 2 out of the 4 new libraries that we brought on was we did like a quick analysis of their collection compared to the CCS collection. That was really just like matching on OCLC numbers to say like, okay, so like 65% of your collection overlaps with like what we already have, but like 35% of your collection is going to be new to all of our members. So acknowledging what that library is going to be bringing into CCS and providing access to patrons. I think sometimes it's really easy to say, oh, well, that's a really small library, so like their collection's not gonna like add to CCS. But I think a lot of times smaller libraries have some very like interesting specific collections that, you know, we would overlook if we were just looking at numbers. So that's certainly something we could do when we're addressing membership applications is, you know, as Karen said, kind of evaluate the collection, the incoming collection, to see like how it complements or enhances what we already have. I feel like in general, this is tough for, I think that CCS has a lot that we can do to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I mean, it's hard because I think we're really here like responding to our member needs, and, you know, we're not working directly with the public. And I think there's a lot more opportunity when you are working directly with the public to like, you know, focus on inclusion, for example. As far as like the membership strategy, I don't know that this is the best place for this goal. I mean, I tried to work it in under develop flexible responsive services. Like that's where incorporating universal design practices. So both like web accessibility as well as our in-person training. How are we making sure that our in-person training is going to be available and accessible to all library staff, even if they have some like learning differences or physical differences. So I think having it in our guiding principles is really helpful, because then as we're working on our annual priorities, we can think about it and build it in. But from a membership growth, this was an area that it's like we've kind of talked about it. I struggle a little bit with what it would look like aside from, you know, we've talked a lot before about like, well, we don't want a bunch of small libraries in CCS because they'll like drain our resources. And is that true? Or, you know, where is that sentiment coming from? Like analyzing that. I also don't know that we want to like actively pursue small libraries, because based on our current membership fee structure, I don't know how sustainable it would be for them. So I don't know. This one is just a tough one for me that I've been thinking about and would be happy to have more feedback on.
This is Catherine. I think that the confusion for me came in the heading where it says strategically build membership to further promote resource sharing. And then to tie diversity and equity and inclusion into that gets a little convoluted. But how I reconciled it all in my mind was to sort of go down Karen's path. So, I mean, I think that there's possibilities for CCS to come up with some sort of quarterly, I don't know, some sort of report or something that says, hey, we've analyzed the collection, and by the way, you know, none of you own any works in Spanish, or none of you own any works in Mandarin, whatever the results are. Because I think my team, because we have a little fat in our materials budget, like we would probably be willing to add some of that, even though our population isn't looking for it. And that would be sort of our contribution to the resource sharing aspect of this. You know, we would add 100 books in Spanish. but I think that has to be a sort of agreed upon at the level. I mean, we have in the last 6 months done what Karen has suggested is, we have gutted our children's collection so that it now speaks in the voices of the people that those stories are about. They're not circulating at our library. We are sending those out to everybody else because that's not, yes, it's important for white people to have their children read books in voices of children of other color, but the primary look of that collection seems to be that it is circulating among the other 27 libraries. So I think some sort of collective activity would be an objective that we could, that goes under here. An annual objective is an analysis of the collection. Because I think there's like so many things, you're trying to get a lot of things in this same heading that don't seem to deliver the heading clearly.
In reading both Sarah's comments and what you have under that for the committee, I don't know that we can say prioritize, but I do think that we can maybe, you have developed a strategy for membership growth, but maybe use the last part of Sarah's on that. And I just wanted to comment that there are ways that libraries can improve the EDI or DEI, whichever way you do it. Right now, we're doing an EDI audit of the collection. And so we'll be adding titles that reflect our parts of our community that we haven't really reflected. And we will clean out some things that have negative connotations, and we'll be looking at that. So maybe that goes back to professional development. In my assistant director for public services did a course through ALA, I believe, on doing an EDI audit. And now she's sharing that information with the staff so that we can do it. They can all do their parts of their collection. And maybe we just do something for membership, maybe PAS, that concentrates on that so people at least are aware. Just my thoughts.
Yeah, I would like to circle back to what Catherine said. Like, I think that I'm trying to do a lot with the bullet point in this membership strategy section, and maybe it needs to be up in, develop responsive services and part of our annual goals there. Certainly, I think we could, provide some tools to help libraries that are doing these sorts of audits, or if there is widespread interest in like a cooperative collection development program to kind of fill in gaps that CCS sees as a whole across our service area, as Catherine suggested. That would be something we could work on. Another thing that we've touched on a little bit that is sort of a, I don't want to say trend because it makes it sound like trendy, but an issue that is currently getting some light in the cataloging world is like harmful, like Library of Congress subject headings, and organizations saying, well, we're not going to wait for Library of Congress to change it because the House of Representatives voted no, and they're not going to change it. So making some internal changes to subject headings, either just the way they display in the catalog or in the database or both. And that's something we've talked about a little bit internally, but didn't really have a mandate to move forward with, but that's something we can add in, removing some harmful or derogatory language that is from standard thesauri.
You're talking about like the illegal alien subject heading that was in the recently written about?
Yeah, there's that one. And then I think there's a lot of work around like indigenous populations as well.
Mhm.
And then I think there's also some discussion about like LGBTQ plus subject headings. So yes, the illegal aliens I think has gotten the most amount of press, but it's that same concept applied to some other areas of the catalog as well.
I love that. I think that's a very appropriate direction to be going in. I think the fact that this ended up under the membership, building membership to further promote resource sharing in Illinois. What I recall the discussion starting out with is something that Mick said about when he was at Zion Benton, and it was to do more with supporting, so it was more about the small libraries, supporting some of the libraries and communities that probably do have a lot of people of color in them, but wouldn't be able to afford CCS without some more support. So I kind of feel like that was part of the germ of this, and that if we go completely in a cataloging direction on it, we'll lose track of that piece of it. So I kind of actually like where you have it here, if that's what we mean by it. If we don't mean supporting other communities, then it should probably go in a different place. And it should be more like with the data analysis piece, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it could be a yes and if that's what the committee wants. Like it is, if it's one of our guiding principles, it should be everywhere. So what does it being everywhere look like? And is that what we want to take to governing board and say this is what we should do? I'm on board.
So this is Kim. I do not like it under build membership because I think it's implying things that we're not really prepared to. You know, I don't feel like we're going out searching specific types of libraries and then we're going to help fund them. That, you know, even in other libraries that have come in over the last couple of years, is who can afford it. There's been big discussion about when they're paying and, you know, who's footing the bill and that type of thing. I think the concept does fit under the flexible responsive services, as well as identify and pursue opportunities for enhancement of core ILS services to improve patron and staff experiences. You know, that's that if we can focus on what we can do ourselves to be more diverse, equal, and inclusive, you know, that's where we can control our activities. So I would like to see those types of statements under the other two areas versus building membership specifically associated with that. Because even the analyzing someone's collection when they're coming in, I see that being very difficult to say, well, your collection, you know, isn't really very diverse, so we're not accepting you into CCS. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, you could almost put it under help libraries use ILS data effectively and say something like prioritize collection growth that reflects our commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Diane, the thing with that strikes me is that CCS doesn't control nor dictate our collection development.
No,
you know, they could, but I could see saying, you know, teach us how to use the tools so that we would have that information to guide us in building collections.
But that's a place where we're using ILS data to do our audit. So that's an area where we could put something, if that's, you know, what we want to do.
I think if we say something that's more like support collection growth that reflects our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're not saying we're only going to help libraries if they're doing what we want them to do, but that we'd be providing those tools and that analysis to help them make those decisions internally. I think putting it in the ILS data section makes a lot of sense. And then when we're talking about enhancements of core ILS services, talking about discovery and subject headings and descriptive cataloging, I think could make a lot of sense in that section. I agree with Kim's statement, like certainly as we've been bringing in new libraries, I think both long range planning, executive committee, budget and finance, governing board, all of the decisions that were made were really focused on new members coming in, being kind of on equal footing and putting into the community pot, as opposed to like being supported by the community. So if we did keep this in this membership area, that would really be a big shift that as Kim said, I'm not sure that, you know, folks are ready to actually do.
Yeah.
Having it in these other areas, I think makes sense.
I can agree with that.
Is there any reason for us to make this decision now as opposed to bringing it to the full board to have that discussion?
I think that we want to craft this document in the way that we're prepared to recommend it. It certainly is still open for discussion once we put it in there. But if we leave that statement under membership, then we're essentially saying as a committee, we're recommending that statement under membership. You know, I guess when we send it to them, there could be a similar discussion or here's some points, you know, this is what we're recommending at this point. Here's some other issues that we struggled with that we'd like further discussion on. You know, we could highlight it that way if we want to be sure that they talk about it.
Fair enough. You know,
It sounds like
I'm never trying to encourage, you know, 3 or 4 hour group rewrite sessions. I just wanted to ask the question.
well, it sounds like we're all pretty much in agreement of moving it from the membership area. So we should do that before presenting it to the rest of the committee, to the executive committee.
I think that's true. And I think another good reason to move it is that there's more chance that we can actually do stuff in that area if we move it to these 3 other topics versus leaving it just under building membership with that. That seems harder to achieve. And so if we really believe in that principle and want to make progress, then I think we should put it in some of these strategic directions where we actually can do stuff.
Yeah, because the in my opinion, the whole, you know, EDI is such a broad topic, and every library's community is going to be very different. And I love the idea of a collaborative collection, because I may not buy material, or we may not buy materials for our library that some other library might need or want, because it reflects their community. Now, it's not to say that your collection should only be, you know, talking or sharing information about certain groups of people or whatever. But I may not buy too many books on a certain culture that is found, like there's a pocket of them in another library's community. But if if somebody were to come in and say, I need some materials on so-and-so, rather than buying them for that one patron, if we have access to this collaborative collection that kind of fits into that EDI, umbrella, that would be ideal. I mean, it's such a broad topic. I think the biggest help for all of the libraries in CCS is how to navigate that topic and how to make it applicable, realistically applicable to our budgets and to our communities and to our space, et cetera. What does that really mean? How do you analyze and audit and do all that stuff? I think I think a lot of librarians are really anxious to do this, but they may not necessarily have the knowledge on how to make it happen. Because the diversity is a huge word. I mean, it's not just about cultural differences. There's a lot of things that it covers, and we have to be able to make sense of that. And I think we need a lot of guidance with that. Or maybe that's just me.
This is Catherine, because I agree with what everything has said, but I also think that Mick and I had an idea of that maybe went to more resource sharing and supporting. So I think if we had some sort of statement about being creative, and I mean, we have, because there's at least one library, maybe two in this meeting, where we changed the payment structure. So, I mean, I think of Highland Park. Heidi's now at Highland Park. So if I go to Highland Park and together we could bring on Highwood, which would definitely benefit from a consortium membership. And if we could do it in a way that Highwood came on as some sort of branch mechanism, if we were willing to have a statement in here that we're willing to be creative in allowing members or supporting members in efforts to, I don't know, help libraries, it would be supporting resource sharing, it would be doing all of the things that we want to do in here, but in a way that's we've started to erode or be flexible, depending on which side of the discussion you were on, are certain standards for membership or commitments about membership. So I think Mick and I might still like to see something in here, maybe not. I think it's a little crass to say we're only going to let or we want to build libraries because they serve populations that may be typically underserved, rather than just, we want to, I don't know how to say it without sounding crass, but I think but I think I'd like to still see something in there about considerations of standards for membership can be weighed on a case-by-case basis or something. I don't know how to word it, but I don't want this concept to completely leave the concept of membership. I mean, I think it's great. I think if you could teach us all how to do an audit of our collection, that would be marvelous, a marvelous professional development opportunity.
Just real quick, Catherine, are you talking about financial considerations, or when you're talking about a library?
Yeah, I mean, we've already made financial considerations for the last two libraries that came on. They're allowed to make their downstroke payment over 5 years. So I think, you know, at some point, that was a decision that was made to be flexible to allow some libraries in. So maybe there are other libraries that there are certain other flexibilities regarding financing that can be made.
Yeah, I just see when you're talking about Highwood, though.
I just use it as an example. I have no idea what's going on there.
I think, well, what I'm getting at is, having been involved for so long, I see other libraries inquire that are small, like Fox River Grove, but they don't have the funds to maintain once that initial possibly 5-year payment is done for the joining. So I think that's something that we really don't have the capability of helping them out with.
Catherine, I don't disagree with your with what you're saying, and I think because it's something that's already happening, as you've pointed out, I don't know that not having it in here means we're not going to do it. I mean, we executive committee last year, I think, kind of reaffirmed that all membership inquiries will be handled on a case-by-case basis rather than having like a stringent set of qualifications to join, and that that I have the ability to negotiate with them up to a certain point. Like if they were going to have their whole downstroke paid within the fiscal year that they go live, like that, I can just work out with them on their own. But anything beyond that would go to governing board. So I think
I understand that, and I'm not objecting to that. But I also know that I get $5,000 of the kickback from Rails, right? $5,000 in my budget. I don't know how much Brian gets. I don't know what percentage of his budget. That's $166,000 a year that this association gets.
Mhm.
You know, the $5,000 that I get, or maybe it's six. It's de minimis. But that 160,000 could be very meaningful to bring a library in and support it over a certain period of time. And so but we never had that discussion. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was at a meeting that I didn't get to or something, but that's just what I'm saying is like, that would have been a really good opportunity to think about applying in a different way. And I know every library is in a different situation, but that's all I'm saying is like, let's be creative. Let's not just say, oh, here's a check, let's divide it 27 ways based on whatever and get it out to people. And maybe it's a really meaningful amount for Diane's library or for Kim's library, but and Zion Benton, but maybe there's a better use for that kind of money to achieve some of the goals that we all care about.
I'm nodding. I don't like, yep.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to write that, but I'm just saying is that, you know, I'm pretty sure that $160,000 check discussion is going to come up again in a couple of months. And I don't know. I mean, I'm interested to hear from Brian. He's got more of a closer touch on this kind of thing than I do, but that's just something I would throw out. I mean, some people get a lot more than I get, so maybe it's more meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us that amount is going towards, first and foremost, to our 5-year payment. Is that, Rebecca? So we're not actually receiving, you know, any, like our library is not receiving any of that. Our portion, I guess, is going directly to that payment that we arranged, you know, for that 5-year period to pay that down. So, and, you know, in terms of, you know, at least for me, I mean, it did make a difference. You know, it was kind of like the final kind of push to get my board over the line to go back to CCS, was to be able to negotiate that payment in. That was, you know, I did that based on direct feedback from my board asking me to go to CCS and to negotiate that. And see if there was any way for us to be able to extend that payment. So it did make a difference, you know, for us to be able to do that and to have that flexibility, because I think it really was kind of the final piece that I needed to get it to the finish line here with my board. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's kind of, you know, my perspective of, you know, it did make a difference in the end for us to be able to get to where we are.
So just in the interest of moving the discussion along, I think that we are all in agreement with the points that Catherine has raised. I mean, we're all sitting here nodding our heads and those kinds of things. But as Catherine said, and I think that we're all struggling, is how do we incorporate that sentiment into this document? Or I guess, do we try to, I mean, it sounds like from Catherine's report that she does want to have to, or does want us to include something that speaks to that. But I'm sitting here struggling with where that goes and how it's worded and what that ultimately means. Actually, I'm not sure that that furthers this discussion or not, but.
Well, maybe the easiest thing is because we all have to get on is like, there's just some sort of where we have a monitor interest from potential. And the third bullet point has just in the monitoring interest or responding to interest from potential members, there's an interest in developing creative solutions. I don't know how it gets worded. And the governing board can hash it out if they, if, Mick can stand up and speak for himself about how important that is to him. Or if he feels that at a point, we can just, every time Rebecca says to us, oh, there's a little library, the entire population is X, 57% of it is Spanish speaking, they have a high school graduation rate of 17%, they can't afford to come in, then it opens us the ability to have the discussion of potential support.
So does everyone see the wording that Rebecca included in that third bullet point? And if you've seen it, are we all in agreement that this is at least a starting point, that we're comfortable enough with that particular bullet point that encompasses our discussion and is something that we feel like we can present to governing board?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I think it is. Catherine, Howard, are you comfortable enough with that going forward for right now?
Right. I mean, I just think it keeps it on everybody's radar screen. And I know the job of this committee is to bring a document to governing board. And I just feel as a committee member, I know there were some strong points of view on that. And I just don't want it to get lost, because then when you get to governing board, there's 24 people or 27 people around the table and people feel it's a done deal. So at least it's in there. And people can support it or not in a bigger environment.
I think it's okay. This is my opinion. You guys really might not agree with it, but I think it's okay for us to present this document to governing board and invite them to discuss a couple of the key points, rather than what we've been doing a lot lately is kind of like if a committee has banged on something for a while, we kind of take it to governing board, and governing board, there is no discussion on a lot of things because they feel like, oh, the committee's already done all this work. So there are some key points here where I think it would be good to get a little bit of a broader point of view. I think the app a little further down is going to be another one of those things where you kind of just, we shouldn't be deciding that. That's going to be, the bigger group would have to decide that.
I think that makes sense, Susan, and I can, for the packet draft, like we have these discussion questions, some similar questions for governing board.
I agree. I just want to make sure that we're comfortable with that bullet point and being one of the points that we'll discuss, and obviously have to explain more and get some additional feedback. But I agree with you, Susan, as well. But I'm not looking forward to a 4-hour discussion, but we'll let Sarah worry about that as president. She'll have to rein everyone in. Okay, so I'm a little confused as where we're at in the document. Are we down to identify and pursue new opportunities for enhancements now? Okay. So this does, Rebecca has some good bullet points, and then for the committee, there is this discussion about pursuing a system-wide app. And as Susan mentioned, this might be one of those points that we would need to bring to the full board. so I guess the question is, do we want to include anything here, or just maybe leave this as is, Rebecca, for discussion by the full governing board? I don't know. What does everyone think? Do we include something about an app specifically here and discuss, or leave it worded the way that Rebecca has it? Or Rebecca, did you have some other thoughts about how you wanted to, or what feedback you were trying to elicit?
No, I mean, I think that would be a great decision. I'll only add, I thought that I would have a quote by now from Innovative. So Innovative does now have a consortium-friendly app, which until very recently they did not. So we did provide them with the information they need to quote all CCS libraries adopting the app, as well as prices for each individual library if they wanted to adopt it. So I think that could really help the discussion at governing board. You know, Communico is really expensive, but has a lot of features. So I think for CCS staff, the big thing is we don't want to ask people to change from an interface that they like and their patrons are used to unless there's going to be a really big benefit. So I think for libraries that comes down to cost in some instances, but the features are also really going to matter. So I'm comfortable leaving this as like, what do you think, governing board? If the committee is comfortable with that as well.
I am as well. I mean, because I almost see this as being more of one of those annual objectives or annual goals, as opposed to, you know, this document feels like it's a little bit broader, and this seems really specific, like one of those really measurable goals. And so maybe it doesn't even need to be, you know, the discussion of the app, does that need to be included as part of the strategic plan? Or is that just, you know what I mean? Or is that just an objective under this particular strategic direction? Does that
I
make
agree
sense?
with Pam. I think that this is my question, because I have board members that are really pushing for an app, and I've talked to everybody and nobody's fully happy with any of the other options that they're using. But then I would say for purposes of this document, you also want to delete the discovery subject headings descriptive cataloging, because that seems to be a specific item that you want to put under staying current with emerging technologies. So if you're keeping it all at a very high level, then for consistency's sake, that should also come out. But
Yeah.
I also like to see this on a governing board agenda,
I
with
know.
the app soon.
I think too, for so long we kept waiting for Cersei to have an app for us that we could all have, and in the meantime we all went out and got our own thing. I mean, we had Boopsy for a long time. Now we have Kapira because it has more bells and whistles, but it might be too late for the majority of people, and we're all under contract right now probably, but you know, it's worth the discussion somewhere down the line.
Yeah, I'm comfortable pulling this out and just putting it on the governing board agenda. Is anyone opposed to that?
No, I think that's a good idea, Rebecca.
Done.
Okay. Does anyone else have any comments about the other bullet points under that strategic direction? To make sure I've got all my terminology correct.
Again, you just have to strike the discovery / subject heading descriptive cataloging line.
Yeah, that's just one of my notes for
Okay.
when we're working on I just added that while we were talking.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, it doesn't look like, Rebecca, you have any things that you want us to specifically talk about under the next one, help libraries use ILS data. I know that we were going to include some of the EDI stuff in there. So is everyone comfortable with what Rebecca had sent us initially and with the additions that were added during this meeting focusing on EDI?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then it looks like the final strategic direction, continue to focus on providing value to CCS members through fiscally responsible stewardship of member library resources. I know we talked a lot about that at our last meeting. So I'm comfortable with what Rebecca has. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Or Rebecca, do you have any questions specifically related to that?
No, just if this is what the committee had kind of expected in here, and if these sound good.
I felt like it was a good synthesis of everything that we had talked about regarding fiscal stewardship. Okay. So did we address all of your other questions, Rebecca?
Yeah, so the last one is just this looking towards the future thing. So a question that was in the other sheet, like, is this something we just include in the annual report, just a section of a governing board topic? I don't know that, you know, this is something like every month we're going to be talking about what resource sharing looks like in 10 years. But I do like the idea of documenting that these are the big questions that have been asked of, you know, the committee and CCS, and I want to recognize that it will take time to get answers. So I mean, my question is, what do you think about deliverables when it comes to actually implementing the plan?
So Rebecca, after the governing board adopts this, then would this committee quickly work with you to develop some measurables for the first year, or is it something that you and your staff would develop and then look for us to react to?
I think the second one. So I think if we were comfortable today making a recommendation to governing board with the suggested changes, that this would go to governing board in January. The plan isn't scheduled to start until July, so we have time to develop that first year plan. So yeah, I would think that my next step would be working with my staff to identify, you know, what's going to be achievable year one and develop those measurable goals, and then bring them back to the committee in like March-ish.
So Rebecca, another question is part of that, then can you indicate whether whatever you develop for year one, is this part one of 3 years, or, you know, some idea of the duration and how year after year things build upon that foundation, or if they're a specific standalone?
Yes.
Thank you.
So is everyone comfortable with what Rebecca had outlined, that, you know, she'll take the notes that she took, you know, clean this up a little bit, and then she and her staff will work on developing those objectives, bring those in the interim. In January, we will share with full governing board the amended document here, and then once that's passed, then Rebecca's staff will work on some objectives, and then we'll meet again in March, you suggested, Rebecca, to go over those and make sure that we're all on board with that.
Yes.
Are we all in agreement that that's a good way to move forward for right now?
Yes.
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 Yep. Sounds good.
Yep.
Do you need anything else from us, Rebecca? Does that give you enough, after these discussions, enough guidance to move forward with your staff? And you know, start thinking about some of these things, but obviously you'll make these revisions and get those to us.
Yes. Yeah, I'll send you the revisions. Just going back over it, I think the only bullet that we've actually added is under help libraries use ILS data, and that support collection growth that reflects our commitment to DEI. And then we're going to take out this thing about the app. This is just a note here that will come out. And then this stuff is all notes that will come out as well. So really the only change is taking out this third bullet point in strategic membership, taking out the fourth bullet point, and then, yeah. I just want to make sure that you all know what you're approving and that we have a general agreement on that.
Does that look good to everyone? I think it looks fine.
Yeah.
So just, okay. Yeah, I think that looks good, Rebecca.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion related to this document before we move on? I would just like to say thank you for pulling together our discussions from last time, Rebecca. There's a nice synthesis of that. And okay, so the next item on the agenda is our next meeting.
So if we're comfortable with a March meeting, Beth will send out a doodle to get that on everyone's calendar. Pam will follow up with you for specific dates.
Okay. Does everyone feel like a March meeting would give us enough time to first, does it give your staff enough time in between governing board approving something in January and then us meeting in March, Rebecca? But then does this group feel like that meeting in March, maybe we'll only need one meeting to develop those objectives before something goes into effect in July? Does that give us enough time? Or does someone feel like we need to meet earlier?
I think we're a pretty focused, efficient group with Rebecca and Beth's help. So I think, and if we need to schedule another meeting, we will, right, Rebecca? And Pam, you'll let us know if you think we're stumbling along here.
Okay, no, I just wanted to make sure that everyone feels like that gives us enough time. So I think that timeline is fine. So our next meeting will be in March. We'll pull together some dates and poll everyone to get the best date for everyone when the time comes.
Sounds good.
So if there's no other business, Rebecca, do you or Beth have anything else that you need to? No? Okay.
No.
So if there's no other business, I'm sorry, was someone going to say something?
I was just saying thank you all for the discussion and feedback. I feel like this was really helpful and productive.
Great. Yes, thank you, everyone. Okay. If there's no other business, we will officially adjourn the meeting at 11:22 a.m. So have a wonderful holiday, everyone.
You too.
Stay safe.
You too.
Stay healthy.